you all for coming. Thank you Washington Post for hosting us at the exciting slot, the first thing on Monday morning at Cannes. Well done for making it.
We have a full room, actually.
As Joanna said, we have 3 sessions from the World Media Group this week, 1 today, 2 on Wednesday, around the value of trusted journalism in 2024. And we're going to be looking at that from different angles. We're going to be talking about content partnerships on Wednesday, as well as AI and what that means for the changing role of content creation. But today is all about marketing in a polarised world. We're going to get into just how polarised the world is at the moment, but I think all of us are feeling the changes going on in the news environment. Very, very key. And I'm thrilled to say I have an incredible panel with me. I'm absolutely blessed by people here today. So we have Joanna Wiseman-Souza, who is the VP Global Brand and Marketing at UNICEF. Daniel Wong-Chi-Man, Global Service Line Leader for Audience Measurement at Ipsos. And of course, Joanna Mayer-Jones, who is the Global Chief Advertising Officer for Washington Post.
And to be on this panel, you have to have double vowels.
Joanna, so Dan is going to change it.
Sure.
There might be some pointing going on.
Make sure you point the questions at me that you want me to answer. I'm going to have to. You're both called Joanna.
Have some challenges. So, before we get into the Joanna questions, Dan, we're going to start with you. Marketing in a polarised world, what we're talking about. Everyone knows this year is the year of elections, more than 50% of the world's population voting. Since we set up this panel, the UK is called an election and France is called an election, so that's keeping us on our toes. Is it true that the world is becoming more polarised, or is that just kind of a feeling?
Yeah, the short answer is obviously yes, and everyone's obviously feeling that. We at Ipsos, we like to call it the restless decade, unfortunately, because there's lots and lots of factors right now, which is really kind of impacting all of us. And so with the interconnectivity of the world, we're seeing that essentially what's happening in one part is actually impacting other parts at the same time. So you've got kind of the global economy, which is an issue, you've got political tensions, different governments, you just talked about it, you've got still a little bit of the pandemic, which is kind of lingering, which has changed behaviours at the same time. So all of these factors have created kind of almost like a perfect storm in a way, which has polarised the world. I think the thing to think about is actually it varies from market to market, region to region. So the impact actually differs partly because of culture, but partly because of kind of the governments that are in charge at the same time.
Interesting. So, what did you say? Restless decades?
Restless decades.
Sounds encouraging, doesn't it?
Only good news, right? Only good news. So the restless decade. Joanna Mayer-Jones, one of the narratives we're getting in the trade press is that in a restless decade, in a world with this much disturbing news stories in the cycle, a lot of advertisers are kind of pulling away from election content or news content generally. Is that something you're seeing in the market, and is that affecting some sectors more than others?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a moment right now where the brand safety question for advertisers seems to be sort of top of mind. I'm not seeing just yet that it's like directly, I don't want to be around any elections content, it's not that specific, but I definitely think that the news cycle does impact certain brands' comfort levels in being within news. I see a big part of our responsibility in building the technology that provides brand suitable environments, but B, also advocating for the message that news is a really brand safe environment, and that we have the research and the data that shows that actually your messaging or you as a brand are not impacted by being around a news cycle. The challenge is that it's the slightly subjective, negative news cycle, positive news cycle goes back to your point here about sort of a polarised sort of world that we're in. So the answer is it's not easy out there at the moment. There are a number of different challenges as publishers that we have to overcome. But I think that people aren't necessarily saying, I don't want to be around elections content.
And I guess the flip side of that's from the advertiser perspective, but from an audience perspective, from your readers, I assume they're still turning to you for coverage of the hardest, most interesting news stories.
They sure are, yeah. And that's always been a really interesting tension to me, right? So at the moment that our audience is the most engaged and often the largest is a moment where advertisers versus leaning into that and saying, okay, you know, in May our subscriptions were the best that they've been in the last 2 years. Again, our audience size definitely is spending more time with the content we're producing. Okay, around the election, around the candidates, but actually just broader than that as well across all of our content. And yet advertisers are like, oh, I'm not sure now's the right moment, I want to be careful. And so there is this tension between large audiences being engaged and advertisers not necessarily seeing that as a benefit.
The engagement factor thing is actually a really interesting one, because I think when you think about audiences, understanding the mindset and what they're doing on specific platforms is really, really important. And so that contextual alignment actually can be as powerful as not.
Yeah, perfectly, Joanna. I was going to come to you. You're running brand for UNICEF globally, a huge global organisation doing incredible work. And I'm sure you have a very complex marketing mix with all kinds of elements within that. But I know you work with a lot of World Media Group publishers. What's the benefit? What's the role of those kind of organisations, the trusted journalism pieces, within your overall mix?
Well, certainly we work with a lot of, newspapers, publishers, in order to ensure that our news, which generally circles around what's happening with children globally, the impact that might be having on other global, scenarios in a restless decade, or the way we talk about it sometimes is the malaise of the populations who are feeling a little bit hopeless. We try to, first of all, of course, bring truth to some of the news. We editorially are very happy to have respectable news partners, but also what we do in our marketing mix is try to connect with brands or connect with people who can actually feel a little bit inspired by the fact that there are differences being made around the world, even as the news cycle kind of pushes through what might feel like bad news more often than good. In fact, the world has made a lot of progress over the last decades. In fact, 2003 was the lowest ever child mortality rate in history. 60% decline since 1990. Those are big things. The news covers it, and then it's gone, right? And so part of what we're doing from a marketing point of view is trying to position a little bit more. I do think as well, we have the opportunity, publishers, partners, to be able to also help people act, help people take action, because there is a bit of hopelessness when you think about the big problems that are facing the world. And actually, some of the actors, like UNICEF, like others, are able to help make change. It doesn't happen as quickly maybe as the world wants it to, but it is something that is happening and that we should be able to embrace more publicly and together.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that about people looking on how to take action. I think that's something that we also see within our coverage as well, that when we start to write about the sort of the how-tos, we're just talking about how to have how to impact your own footprint in climate, for example. That content resonates really well with our audience. It's, again, a highly engaged, influential audience. They are also looking for actionable intelligence as to ways to make their lives or their work or their professions better. And I think that we're seeing they turn into trusted sources for that sort of actionable intelligence. So yeah, we see that's a very popular content area.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add to that is there is a trend to be zeitgeisty right now, because audiences are becoming more and more value-based and value-driven. The cautionary tale that I would say to advertisers is actually it needs to be true to the brand, particularly when trying to target kind of B2B audiences and so forth, because they are more likely to go and check to see, are you living that value? Do you actually believe in it? The whole, it's an old one, and it's consumer, but you think of Pepsi and Kendall Jenner, Pepsi can save the world. Nonsense, right? In that way. So in that way, you have to be true because you're going to get called out if not. So it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, authenticity, being able to back up what you're actually talking about.
Yeah.
This is a world where people go and fact check all the time, and especially younger generations. We actually did some research that showed that search is almost a second screen to Gen Z when they're reading news, because they don't just take journalism for its word. They actually want to go and make sure that it's true, and it's the same with brand messaging as well. Like if you're putting a conversation out there, if you're putting a point of view out there, you have to expect that people are going to investigate it further and look into it. And I think that's a great thing, because I actually think when you think about a polarized world, a lot of that polarization comes from this, sort of sense that people aren't going to fact check or aren't going to challenge an opinion. And so we want to be able to create an environment where people can have that conversation, can have that like dialogue with the content that we're creating, but with the content we're creating for brands as well.
Yeah. And I think obviously at UNICEF you have incredible statistics. I think you were talking about the vaccine statistics and the literally life-changing things you've done. How do you think about staying true to that purpose when audiences are always questioning things? Is it harder to go out there when you know that audience is fact-checking your every move?
I think that there are people that sometimes wrestle with it, but we are very sure about our mandate, which is to defend the rights of children. And so it doesn't matter where politically the polarization is. We know that the defense of children and making sure that we can help them, no matter which government is in power, we will be there to, as a neutral party, to only be there in order to
account and
and to negotiate when needed or whatnot. So for us, it's critical that we stay true to that so that we can always be able to work with anybody. We do achieve amazing things, not just UNICEF. I wouldn't want to walk away saying, oh, UNICEF. No, it's in partnership with a number of global, private sector, public sector, governments, other UN agencies, whatever. And the results have been incredible. Things like vaccinating almost half the world's children, which allowed us to be a good partner in COVAX when the world needed us to vaccinate adults as well. I think polio has been eradicated by 99.9% in partnership with the private sector and the public. So tons of amazing things happen that when we come together, when we give that action, when we can give also faith in the global community that when we come together things can get done. It's a good moment in a decade of restlessness.
Well, restless doesn't have to be negative. Right?
That's interesting. And we all were like, oh, that sounds awful. But in actual fact, you're right. Restless is just inherent to change. And in fact, actually, change is a good thing. And there are shifting powers, right? You're seeing not just the largest demonstration of democracy in history, you're seeing a completely new generation voting for the first time as well, which is where I think a lot of the actually unexpected results from some of the elections is coming from as well. I'm really excited by this idea that there is a space for new voices, that there is a space for a new way of thinking. I think it's critically important.
And I really want to empower audiences, right, to know that they can shape the future. There is a way for us to take action collectively, whether you're the CEO or a brand lead or everyday people. We do have that autonomy and no, that's not the A word I'm looking for, is it? Agency. Thank you. We do have agency.
It's right, I imagine English is like your third language. I apologise for having to do this. That is the only language that I speak.
No, the agency, right? And we want to make sure that that is something. We want people to be able to hold on to the hope that they still have, even through some of the bigger stuff that's happening.
And that interconnectivity point is really interesting when you think about younger audiences. So when you think about senior audiences, senior business decision makers, quite often their network is like coming to here, right? It's face to face, it's people that you build relationships with. But the younger generation, actually, their friends and family, their circle, their community is far wider because of kind of social media and what they're doing with it. And so trying to kind of attain and communicate to them is in a different manner.
Well, in fact, not to give you a plug, but one of the reasons UNICEF is here, you're tackling this problem here in Cannes, aren't you, I think?
Absolutely. I mean, we're here in Cannes.
We have arrived.
We're here in Cannes because we want to be working with the private sector, with brands a little bit more concertedly. We want to be able to connect with some of these leaders who can, change social norms or opinions, things like that. And so part of our current strategy is to connect with some of the C-suite, including CMOs.
I think the sort of the coalition approach to tackling these problems is also really important. We talk about this a lot at the Washington Post, that what's quite unique about our audience is it's a combination of policy, business, and then engaged people, right? So opinion formers is another word which we sort of use to describe them, but they are academics, they're leaders in their communities, they're teachers, they're and work at NGOs. And it's our ability to convene those three audiences that is really important when you're actually trying to affect change. Because what I think we've seen really over maybe the last decade, maybe the last 5 years, is that in isolation, those groups cannot make the changes that need to be made to improve society or to, and again, specifically thinking about sort of the work that UNICEF does. And so bringing policy, business, and then again, this sort of engaged audience together, to me, is a critical part of being able to actually affect change and to make a difference.
Yeah, it is, and we see it in the motivations of leaders, but we also see it in some of the coalitions that we even have. So we have the Mental Health Coalition with a number of brands, and so that's people coming together, leaders coming together and saying, this is really important, we need to be able to address this, and we won't be able to do it alone. So,
Yeah.
The spheres of change are kind of coming together in that way, and spheres of influence, is really kind of driving. It's not just government, it's not just policy, it's also people, right? People today are really driving change.
So in that sense, like, and back to like what we were talking about, sort of marketing in a polarized world, I think what you're saying is like, you have to have an authentic voice always as a brand. That's something that we talk about all of the time. But then to try and find the right partners to help you elevate the work that you're doing. And that in turn actually benefits those partners, those NGOs, those organizations that are trying to make a difference. And I mean, for us, and we talk about this all the time, but you have to also be brave as a brand. The question that you asked me, and it's 10 a.m. on a Monday morning, and I was like, oh my God, election marketing, like, of course, Starlight. Of course it's on our mind, right? Because, I think brands still operate often from a place of fear of doing something wrong. So, I mean, if I'm completely honest, we've got all the data that says that's not true, and marketing and news is safe and brand safe, and actually it does better for your performance, but there still is this disconnect. And I guess at the end of the day, I think as a brand, like if you have an authentic voice and you're leaning into something that is important, then the news cycle shouldn't be the thing that determines whether or not you advertise in news. And also just, and I'm going to say this like a billion times this week, I can tell, but news is not a monolithic category, right? What is this huge, all-encompassing news, right? News is sports, it's entertainment, it's food, it's travel, it's geopolitics, it is, elections, but it's so much more than one thing. When you approach it with this, again, monolithic approach of, oh, news is bad, can't do that, then there's a lot of damage being done ultimately to the ecosystem, where places like UNICEF need to show up because they need to be in front of our audience. And so there is a bit of a cycle here. See, now I'm warming up.
I'm super conscious of time, and I think we can carry on talking about it. I've got loads more questions, but we have a lovely room full of people. Has anyone got questions for the panel? Otherwise, I have lots more questions, but now that we're all warmed up and ready to go. But any questions on marketing in the polarized world?
Sure. Yeah. For the brands that continue to have a steady stream of investment in news, what are they doing differently in their content and their planning and their approach that you think gives them the confidence to maintain that share of voice?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. I think it's a multi-layered answer as well. I think first, when we're working with partners at the moment, we're really encouraging them to use some of our proprietary technology that allows them to be a lot more sophisticated when it comes to targeting within a news environment. The sort of sledgehammer approach of blocking news or negative sort of keyword lists feels quite antiquated in an approach to work with us. So we like to work directly with partners, and we like them to use our proprietary technology to create a brand safe environment. That's like the foundation, right? Make sure what you're doing has the right technology behind it to reach the right people, but then to provide a suitable environment for your brand. The second is to try and find areas where your brand or where your mission has a clear voice, and then surrounding it with relevant editorial content as well. We're talking a little bit about climate, right? So our climate desk is one of the areas in our newsroom that we have invested in the most, and we've thought about it not just from a investigations, climate, what's going on in the world point of view, but from how to, the sort of element of service journalism. So we have a climate coach, Michael Coren, that does a lot more sort of social first type dynamic Q&A style with our audience, and then we have our policy content as well. So from my perspective as a brand, we can help you find the right environment that then adds credibility to the work you're doing. So like make sure the tech is right and that you're being smart about way of showing up, and then also find a way to elevate the stories you want to tell with the right contextual environment. It's funny because this is probably the hardest moment it's been for the news industry, if I'm completely honest, right? We're on another massive change. The role of AI is going to evolve everything we do and every way that even you discover our content. Yet, I think quality news environments have never been more important for brands because you know exactly where you're going to be. You can lean into the credibility that we provide. And I think trusted journalism, again, plays a role in society like it sort of hasn't in the past. Or maybe it's just even more present. So, yeah, I combination of answers there.
We certainly feel that way as well with UNICEF. I know that our budgets are not the kind of budgets that maybe you're hoping for in some of your partnerships, but certainly we do lean into those credible voices and make sure that we can connect where people trust what's being published.
Trusted environments, again, and places where you have a direct relationship with the publisher. That to me feels like an important moment to make sure that we can continue to build a healthy news ecosystem. And on the budget thing, look at me, I'm already like, what are you saying? Not much. There's such a range of what we can do.
Well, and we do.
I know, of course, but I think there's some of the preconceived notions around news and quality publishers and working with us that, I think there's ways to address that. I just can't help myself.
We'll pick that up on another session on Wednesday, actually. They'll be talking about working with lower budgets.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Not here.
Mixed messages over
Again, it's really more coffee perhaps. I think is the next step. Sorry, Jamie.
Yes, right. Jamila, you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask Joanna, what's the sort of, or what is, or what are some of the biggest challenges that UNICEF is facing at the moment? And from a brand partnerships perspective, is there anything that you look for in terms of collaborations that any of the brands in here could be, working with you on to address those challenges? Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, the world is not in a great place as much as the progress that we've seen. Children are caught in more wars or more conflicts, and the situation in some places is brightening, and in other places I think we see it in the news that it's not great everywhere. There are also some crises that are not getting the kind of attention that others are. UNICEF actually works across 12 of the 17 SDGs, and so the opportunity to sort of put a brand's purpose into a more meaningful impact is something that we look to. We can't always partner with every brand, that's certainly true. We have to stay fairly close, but what we're doing is sort of saying, if you'd like to partner, let's talk, let's look at what that could look like. Because as we think about marketing, you can think about the ways that we can change opinions, change behaviors, sometimes with climate. We can also talk about the way that our partnerships can help a brand. That sometimes is something that we can do as well, because we are a trusted brand, because we are in 192 countries. We have quite a lot of impact as well in emerging markets, and so those are the kinds of things that we're happy to talk about. I can't make promises, but certainly we're here to look at what opportunities there are, because I know it's difficult for the private sector to make that impact alone, and we are chronically underfunded, so how can we make those two things work?
I think technology has really helped to speed things up in terms of getting messages out. But I think understanding audiences and context is really important, because there's this thing now where it's like, oh, we just need to push it, right? And if you understand more about your different types of audiences, you'll realize that in different places you need to be communicating different messages. And I think a challenge for the industry is quite often we're looking for shortcuts. So we use taglines like Gen Z, baby boomers, whatever it is. But actually, if you think about that term of baby boomer, that doesn't actually translate in every country, you know, because it was linked to the World War, right? And so if you think about Brazil or India, you know, so that's where we need to be careful and think about context when considering audiences.
Yeah, it's a really smart point. I always think about it all the time with millennials. I mean, there's a really big age range with people, right? But how you sort of just all get lumped together in a cohort. So we've been talking about this a lot at the Washington Post recently, which is this idea that one size really doesn't fit all. And that actually when you're using, again, smart tech, you can be a lot more nuanced in your approach, in your messaging, and I think that's really important. I do think that don't sort of just be like, oh, Gen Z, they don't want hard news, or they don't want this sort of information, or they're not engaged in this way. I think that's presumptuous, right? And actually to be specific and to use the data and then to use the tech to ultimately customize messaging, I think that can make a massive difference.
But that context of data is really important, because we live in a world where there's data everywhere now. So it's understanding actually where that source has come from, what is actually relevant for, to then kind of action and to do something with.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the room?
Yeah.
I have one. And I'd love to hear from Joanna on UNICEF, but in thinking about partnerships in news, who's getting it right? Like, do you have an example of somebody who's doing it really
Washington
smart?
Post,
I was saying,
I'm kidding.
from the brand perspective, you could even speak about some of the partnerships that we've had on Washington Post. But from the brand perspective, who is doing some really smart work within the news space, whether it be on Washington Post or one of our other friends in news?
Right, Joanna, I think we'll come to you last.
Yeah.
But sitting in UNICEF, you're looking at partnerships across the board, right? Like, as you say, UNICEF is not totally unique.
Yeah.
Whose work do you see that you really think, oh, I wish I was doing that kind of work?
So I'm not allowed to talk about one of the ones that we have.
You're supposed to.
No. It was really talk about anything. Yeah.
I will, because we're super proud of
Yeah.
the partnership that we have with the FT, and it crosses, we have a specific hub where we have leaders who partner with us talking about the partnerships that they have with us. So whether it's the CEO of SAP, in fact, we've got philanthropists as well, and so they tell their story about why UNICEF is so meaningful to them, or what kind of impact they're seeing. We also go to various events with them. They've been a really good partner with us. I think that they believe very firmly that working with UNICEF is something that can help them as well. So it's a fruit fund. We are looking for more of those kinds of media partnerships. So.
And Joanna, you were talking before, or Dan as well, but I'm really interested in this idea of partnerships that include both corporate and NGO or charity organisations, political organisations, and a media owner kind of coming together. Have you got any examples of that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, probably one of our largest partnerships is with Rolex, who have worked with us now for 5 years around the Perpetual Planet, which is all of their climate work that they do. And that's work where we have our content team, the Rolex team. Actually, I think Alex Honnold is in town, and he's one of our podcasters. And that's with Rolex's support, we expanded our editorial section, and again, then we have events that we do with them. So it's a full partnership in that sense. But the commitment from Rolex allowed us to invest in editorial that was really important to our audience that ultimately runs policy. Right, so there is that connection of being able to really connect, have the change, and ultimately have that influence, which I think is important. You're like the question of like what's a good partnership and what stands out, and then again, obviously I think extremely highly of the FT. It's this idea of making sure that everything is connected, right, and also that everyone is engaged in the work. The reason I think Rolex and a number of our other partnerships work so well is because we have these really important relationships with the client directly, with our editorial teams, with our talent internally, and we all work together and we all lift it up. I think if you're waiting for just one piece of that to do the hard work and the heavy lifting, then you miss the real value of actually having a partnership with a publisher, right? The publisher, you want, again, everyone from the C-suite down to be involved in the work so that they can share it and promote it and feel like connected to it.
Yeah, and I think that goes for both sides, right?
Exactly.
So within the publisher, but also within the brand.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That 360 gives you that substance.
That's right. That's right. And that's the other advantage, which is that it's a combination of content and storytelling and expertise and events and digital, that ecosystem that we get to bring to the table is really important.
But add that notion of impact. You need to know kind of what impact you're trying to drive, and I think there's almost a little bit of a malaise or laziness in the industry where we take kind of a measurement framework and we just drop it onto the next campaign. And so we really need to actually consider kind of what is the right metric, what is the right thing that we're wanting to measure, right? To then understand if it has actually done anything.
Yeah, I think that'll be a conversation that comes up this week as well, like this idea of return on ad spend or return on investment.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be, sure, quantifiable is excellent, but we also have quite a lot of qualitative that comes back, and that is super valuable internally, right? When we've got somebody saying, oh, this partner saw this, advertorial, and they want something similar. That's hard to quantify until the deal is signed, and of course those deals end up being several stages, but you know that kind of,
Well, you see, that's something I was going to ask you, not to get into the details, but does success look like for you as UNICEF as just as in donations, or is there a combination of awareness and influence, and like how do you consider something as a partnership successful?
And I mean, it depends on which partnership we're looking at, right? It could be a media partnership if you think about some of our other partnerships. Microsoft's always an interesting one where they gave us the technology and built what we call the learning platform, which now rolls out across dozens of countries and has helped millions of children have come through for refugees and children on the move, but now through the pandemic ended up being really useful as schools were closing. We connect children to the internet, we connect schools to the internet, and so it really depends on what we're trying to solve, but because we work across so many different issues in so many different places, I really think that you can find, if this is what we're trying to solve, UNICEF is probably going to be able to figure out a way that we can do that.
Yeah.
But it will be based on those shared kind of aspirations, right?
Yeah.
I think that is a brilliant note. I'm conscious of time. I think we've probably finished there in terms of opportunities. Reach out to UNICEF. I think that could be a fascinating part of it. Also, come back here on Wednesday morning because we have Vodafone Business Brand Manager and UN Worldwide talking specifically around how you build these kind of collaborations, including the role of the agency, which we've kind of skipped over this morning, but that's a whole other interesting conversation. But before we get into all of that, thank you so much to all my panelists, and everyone has a great day.
Thanks, David.